evening and welcome to the New Athens. You need to emerge from this with the tools to create a new world. The New Athens, the blockchain think tank, brings you those tools to understand the chaos swirling around us and the forum to debate how a new generation will take control from the GoVidiots currently mismanaging our nation and our world, with a breakaway civilization leaving us behind. Watch our Friday Night Lights live stream from the bunker on the New Athens YouTube channel for the best that is thought and said on the issues of the day. Ask not what the New Athens can do for you. Ask what you can do for the New Athens. If you like it, leave a like. If you like the content, please subscribe and share. I'm Lorenzo Mefsud, founder of the New Athens. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.
Where to put it if 10-year-olds has died? Action.
Hello, and welcome to the New Athens on this Sunday, the 12th of July 2020, at our new Sunday Night Lights live stream timing. We have in the studio with us today, I'm Lorenzo Mefsud, founder of the New Athens. I have in the studio today Philip Firsov, sculptor, artist, architect, theorist of aesthetics, art historian, and world traveler.
Etc.,
and pirate and bandit and so on. And we'll be producing some films with Philip in the coming weeks about his trips to the outer regions or outer Hebrides, outer regions of Russia, and his study of the architecture there. And that will be very exciting. We've also got for you this evening the premiere on the channel of our film on the introduction to geopolitics, which has been receiving some rave reviews from the new friends of the New Athens, and we'd like to show it to you here tonight and maybe go over a little bit further with Dan Kalupski, who authored the script and did the research behind it, exactly what his thinking was. So he'll be with us in a bit. But the term of the day is #bounceback. And so tonight's theme is
jelly.
The bouncy jelly.
Yes.
Tonight's theme is financial sovereignty and autonomy. And I wanted to start with how you can get on board with what the government's pushing out every day in terms of new forms of support for business, support for self-employed workers, support for innovators and entrepreneurs of different stripes who we'll be supporting ongoing at the New Athens with our tech accelerator, with our blockchain accelerator that we're building here in the bunker, and then out across London and further afield. So we'll discuss a bit this later, but I just wanted to start off with this notion of financial autonomy. We discussed it before with Philip and financial sovereignty in terms of how to live, the different ways that we can structure a life that's to preserve our time, access to our time, and the freedom to work in the way that we want to. And so this is being now supported by government loans, government grants, local authority grants, discretionary grants, which we're currently in the process of applying for all of these forms of financial support coming out of the lockdown, which are available to now help us with this global reset. So we've had a global reset. Everybody's back on the starting blocks, but what we need to be doing is zipping ahead and really accelerating out of this lockdown towards innovation, towards structuring up the tools so that a new generation can take control from the old corporate ways of doing things towards a more decentralized means of structuring entrepreneurship and startups and peer-to-peer trading. And so that's where we come to the importance of financial sovereignty, because we just made a little promotional video for Craig Hunter of mylondontrip.co.uk,
He has 22 service departments available in Golden Square in Soho for very good rates now for visiting London or basing yourself here by comparison to local hotels and local property prices. And we need to encourage people to come back into the city and to come back and do commerce and revive London again. But one of the aspects subjects we touched on was this notion of coming to the table of VCs, venture capitalists, as startups. So if you have an idea, but you don't have any money to back it, the sharks of the VC world smell blood in the water, and they will make you write that contract in blood, make you write that Mephistophelian contract to give over the intellectual property behind your idea, behind your concept, for very, very small chump change for them, like $50,000. You know, the first $50,000.
You a very small amount of money. They'll take everything that you can do and take
all the ongoing
do,
profit,
and then you end up kind of begging for a pay rise, or just as soon as you're in this contract, you're bound to
develop what you're developing for them rather than for you.
Yeah, so it's working for them rather than working for yourself. So what I've found in working as a self-employed person in the last few years was that I always got paid a lot more through what I do privately for myself. And if you have an idea, you can make that happen if you meet the right people without having to rely on the regulations of an institution. So that's very important. You can try and juggle doing both, and keeping a regular income going. So, for example, I've been working for a school, which is an independent company. It's a sort of private school. In there, I've been teaching various things, different levels, to very young children, and teaching history, Russian, and also fine art, and creating tours for the school and the kids. And everything is run by Olga, the director. She makes a very good deal for the parents to have all the education that they want on the Saturday, so that the parents can take their kids in there and leave them to us to develop their secondary sort of education apart from their main primary English school that they do. And she gets a lot of these specialists to do this business for her. And then then this sort of gray area appears where people might want more private lessons, but we're sort of signing a contract saying we shouldn't take the clientele from this main hub. And so we agree to
non-compete.
To not compete, not to start up our own schools. It's very much about how to keep the team members of staff within that structure, working for that organization. So that raises the profile of the teachers that work in there, and then obviously they can work elsewhere because they've got that good reputation within an established community. And then, so obviously, then people might hear of us and approach us and say, well, can you do this as well? And you need to tutor that. And so that's, a way of keeping the business running and being seen to be doing a good job. Yeah.
So I think what we discovered from our discussion with Craig and looking at some of what you said about the ability to work privately rather than to have your hands tied by these institutions, that the key is to come as a peer, not as a supplicant.
Yeah.
What you want to do is you want to offer a set of skills into a structure that they require and don't have.
They can't live without those skills.
But not sell yourself not sell your whole soul into that, so that you can then preserve your own intellectual property, whether it's you in terms of your teaching, making videos of your teaching, and then selling it separately, whether it's in terms of contacting different clients. So the important notion is this notion of peer status, and that often comes with having your own investment to back the model. And so you're not just relying on one side to provide all of the cash and the other side just to be providing concepts and skills. And so that's what we're trying to create here at the New Athens. That's what we're trying to structure up, not only within our own structure, but also then farming that out to different startups, to different entities, which we can create together.
I mean,
to
I
give
think the
people
key
this
is to
financial
keep
autonomy.
to keep yourself flexible and work within several markets, not sort of sign up a full-time contract to take a full-time position. So I've been discussing with various schools about the idea of doing teacher training and then working full-time, and then you look at the prospects of that. You'll start off on a very relatively low income with a high amount of work to do, and then you've got to work your way up and stay completely fully in there, and that doesn't give you the spare time or the evening time or anything, the energy to run other businesses, other private teaching business or whatever else you want to do, artwork, to make artwork or whatever else I need to do. I wouldn't be able to do that if I was doing a full-time teaching job.
So this experience of yours was one of the feeders, and the looking at tutoring was one, and tutoring online was one of the feeders into how we got to this point of talking about a blockchain university at the New Athens. This idea of taking courses online and then finding people to participate through an online format. If you look at what Cambridge is doing now, they've taken all their lectures online for the next
Well, our school
year.
did that, and I think a lot of people all the private tutors have done that. And obviously, then they're going to compete with the schools also that are all online. And now we're coming to the end of the term, and a lot of people have had no exams, or they've had no no amount of hours of teaching as they should have done. So now in the summer, when they've got the end of term, they've got all this new spare time, the young kids and people who have this new time, they can think about how they're going to work in the future, and are they going to be reliant on Zoom? I mean, on the one hand, Zoom has been great in terms of not having to go anywhere. So all these private tutors, like me on my bicycle, going around London and wasting hours. But on the other hand, I prefer doing private lessons in person, where I can actually show practically how to make things. And
we start having to have like cameras over the top of the work, so you can work.
Yeah, so you set up a camera on an easel, or absolutely, you can move the camera around. But it's not ideal to stay in that situation. Obviously, ideally, as Craig was saying, we want communal spaces. If it's outside, we've just had a class outside for the kids, painting outside, and that was quite successful because they could actually come and do it physically. They could mix the paint and paint from observation and be in a safe and good environment with a lot of people around, so that they could get back to reality. And I think that's going to come forward now.
And I think that what you've really showed me, Philip, is that the university really has to start from scratch, from early years education. And so this concept of the university, this concept of higher learning, shouldn't be something that only over 18s should be doing.
Yeah.
In fact, it should be something that there's a learning curve which we need to be bringing people onto, so they can participate in our new civilization, in our new tech and art and science. Notion of bringing these two cultures back together, and that set of speeches, the Reith lectures by C.P. Snow, that was called The Two Cultures, where he addressed the divergence between the arts and sciences. That happened in 1951. That was several generations ago, and we still haven't solved that problem. And yet, one part of what I've been interested in looking at these smart cities play that we're now putting together for the New Athens is how much the arts and sciences have diverged, can't talk to one another, so that you end up with, say, rational towns like Milton Keynes, right? Milton Keynes was a town, an ugly town, built in the 1960s for the car. The idea was, after the beaching cuts of the early 1960s, which destroyed the railways. In fact, I have a picture of these beaching cuts here. If you load the
beaching huts, like sort of temporary.
So what this
arches.
So what happened?
Dr. Beeching was employed by the British government to cut the railways.
What we can
cuts.
see here, if you see on the monitor, you can see it here, Philip.
Yeah.
Is the first picture is this capillary network of branch railways through England in 1963, when Dr. Beeching made his report. Here he is.
So that's the
odious man. So this is
It's actually increased mobility for those that can afford it.
So is the line between Oxford and Cambridge, which is currently it's called the East-West. I'm just finding it on the. Here we go. If you share the the screen and put us in a little box. East-West Rail. So one of the railway lines that was shut down in the Beeching Cuts was East-West Rail, which is the current name for the Varsity line between Oxford and Cambridge. And
so that meant they have to go through London.
So yeah, so if you look at a journey that we made the other day to go and see our friends at FutureLink over in Kings Langley. I live in St Albans in Hertfordshire, and then you can see that instead of going from St Albans to Kings Langley on this short axis distance,
you had to go in and
you have
out,
to go into the centre of London to St Pancras, cross over to Euston, and then come back out to come a very short distance away, but as the crow flies. So this is the way our transport infrastructure works. It's very, very much based on this nucleus of London, because the branch railways have been destroyed. So what you can see is a lot of these branch railways, the gully and some of the infrastructure of the pathway of that railway still exists, either with or without rails, or they're in disrepair.
But are there buses you could have taken?
So there are you can take 2 or 3 local buses to get and wait half an hour for each of them in between the stops.
So it's faster to go.
So it's faster to go from St Albans City Station into St Pancras, and then you walk or cycle to Euston, and then go back out to get into Hertfordshire, very close by. This is an example of a trip we took, which is very expensive. It cost £12 just to do the leg from Euston to Kings Langley and back again. So it's very expensive and very inefficient. So the Varsity line is a project by Network Rail called East-West Rail. And East-West Rail is a failed project which attempted to revive this Varsity line between Oxford and Cambridge. Now, where they actually got, by 2016, they had got between Oxford and Bicester Village. So they got from Oxford to the Mall. I think it's Bicester, but they just changed it to pronounce it Bicester because it sounds like gravy rather than dogs. So they got to the Mall in the village, and then they didn't really continue from there. They've just commissioned a new phase 2 work of this line on the 4th of February 2020, which of course has now been shut down because of COVID. So that's Grant Shapps. He's a man who has a little bit of understanding, and he's got a little bit of love for the branch railways, and so he has mentioned it a few times in a few tweets. But what we need to do is we need to activate the Smart Cities program by connecting not just Oxford and Cambridge, but we've come up with one of the HS2 rail engineers, Alistair Lancashire, with expedition partners, looking at a wider revival. So currently, the Crossrail plan is to connect Reading with Shenfield, which you can see on this map. You can see the 2 ends of the Crossrail, one in Essex,
in a big U-bend
one in
into
Berkshire.
the UK.
And so what our proposal for the Smart Cities program for the New Athens will be is to extend the Crossrail through the failed East-West Railway line, through the Varsity line, and reconnect the Golden Triangle of Oxford, Cambridge, and London with high-speed rail and with gigabit internet to create an institute, a 4th Industrial Revolution institute between the 3 universities, Oxford, Cambridge, and London, and reactivate what David Cameron called the knowledge economy. Now, what David Cameron didn't do was deal with the train lines. And what a knowledge economy is, if you take dormitory towns like St Albans, which are commuter feeder towns for London, what wasn't subsidized with David Cameron's knowledge economy concept was all of the people who aren't executives, who don't have expense accounts, and who have to pay for the railway travel, thousands of pounds a year out of their own pocket.
So he's just made it impossible.
The ability to get from your place of residence to your place of work is key to a knowledge economy, right? And so if we can only move between Oxford and Cambridge now by the X5 bus, which takes hours to go through all these small towns, we can see quite how inefficient the transport infrastructure is. Now, we have a bit of a scoop here on the show tonight, because in speaking to Alistair, he identified Calvert, see in the middle of the map here, as the point at which our Crossrail Varsity extension, Oxbridge extension, crosses the planned route of HS2 up to Manchester.
Mhm.
So here
So
at
then that would
Calvert,
connect the north.
would
with
you
Oxbridge,
have
yeah.
you have the
junction point.
fulcrum between them,
Yeah.
and the junction between them. So Alistair's plan, which we're now putting together some research and development for, is to create a city called Calvert Junction, a smart city called Calvert Junction,
Mhm.
smart city.
So that would be the best of
Calvert
Oxford and Cambridge.
So yes, to bring
at
together,
loggerheads.
yeah, so to bring together this Oxford, Cambridge, London confluence with the institute in a location where the institute can have its own home, which is also forms a crossing point between the railways.
So then
Now-
that's also the two capitals, the north and the
and also
south.
then connects all of this infrastructure in the south to the Northern Corridor and through
It's
to
just a
the
big cross. It's a crux.
so what you'd have is a town with a terminus railway in the center with the two lines crossing one another.
Well, do you need
and
a
then-
town or do you just need a station?
No, so currently in the HS2 plan, they've only put a railway sidings. So they put a functional depot in their plan for Calvert. But Calvert Junction can be a smart city seed in itself. It's currently a hamlet. There's no development there.
So you want to put a big architectural forum there?
Yeah, so what we want to do is create the ideal smart city here in England, and then farm that model out to the world using classical architecture based on the bike and on walking as a model from the train line. From the Varsity Crossrail extension crossing the HS2.
So you need a sort of Calvert Library of Ephesus in there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So then what we wanted to design with you was the model for and with other architects who we've got in the accelerator, was this model for what is a rational city. If you take as our example Milton Keynes, is astonishingly ugly, and it was built on the notion of the car being king
And practicality and low cost.
So it was built without this notion of a pro-human future, without this notion of creating a venue that can allow people to imagine, can allow them to
Yes,
think,
I mean, when I
to
drove there
breathe.
recently, all I found, because we had to go to the dentist because there were no dentists working during COVID, and we
Could you
drove
share
there
the screen because
and we
there's pictures
looked
of
at
this
the
place.
buildings. We went for a walk in amongst little and ugly sort of buildings, and it was straight lines and just very strange looking people hanging around in very strange looking streets that looked like they were made out of Lego. It was very, very.
Yes, it's
bizarre.
identikit
And you
kind
sort
of
of found
glass
a lake
blocks.
on the map to look and walk around while waiting for the dentist, and the lake was artificial. Everything was artificial about this place. So how do you get away from that? Well, you probably want to create a station. I mean, you look at these colonial architecture in India, for example.
Oh, we look at the Calcutta
So
development.
you're looking at a station, a university, a library, a public civic building.
So the only time I've been to Milton Keynes was to go here to the Milton Keynes Theatre,
Yeah.
and I saw the Rocky Horror Picture Show for a GCSE drama project. It was a horrible town, but the one funny thing about it was that Neil and Christine Hamilton were on stage in drag as the compares for this Rocky Horror Picture Show. But it really summed up the horror of the place, I think.
So was it a show or was it reality?
Yeah, we were in the theatre. The theatre was the
Stanislavski,
town. Yeah. It's the Fremdungseffect.
So, in terms of shapes and forms that create beauty, I mean, what I've been looking at in architecture for the sort of, everybody knows about the golden section and the Fibonacci numbers and how beautiful shapes can be made out of circles and triangles and squares. I mean, really, it's those three shapes that can be dissected, bifurcated, halved, and stacked, and put in alternate orders. So, if we look at beautiful architecture and how the human body if you sort of took the Vitruvian Man, and you're looking at how the human body fits in to those shapes. It's a man with his arms spread out, and then
find a picture.
he's got his hands that kind of fit in as a radius, or they're not actually exactly a radius because the hands are coming from the higher part of the body, from the shoulder, but they fit into a square and a circle depending on the positions of them being completely straight or diagonal. Same with the legs. So really, you've got this very simple idea of Vitruvius, and
If you share the screen, we can see it.
so you've got the backwards writing of Leonardo da Vinci trying to work out the ideas of Vitruvius.
So here we see Leonardo's Vitruvian Man, which is a form of squaring the circle, which is one of these alchemical notions of mathematical proofs, which we see across history trying to access these ancient truths that you can see in the pyramids, you can see in ancient architecture. And so he's
a little bit like a cross, like a junction, and then
yes,
he's symmetrical. He can assume different poses and positions, and usually you can see the circle is much larger than the height of the man, and by stretching his arms right up at the vertical middle, he might be able to reach that.
Yeah, he'd reach
that
further
circular shape, that circular radius. So the square can be halved by being diagonally bisected, which then creates triangles. Several forms of triangles, because if you did two diagonal lines from the corners, from the opposite corners, you would get 4 triangles. Also you can see how a human body can walk through an arch, because you can see the sort of circular shape around a person. That's anthropometrics really that we're going into, and anthropometrics was standardized in Milton Keynes and places like this, where they could work out the bare minimum of an average anthropometric height that they need to use for doorways, windows, and also they times that by X to try and create larger scale buildings. But actually most of the buildings are quite packed in. It's sort of like trying to pack in as many people as possible.
So very similar to the Vitruvian Man, this is Edward Nightingale's Giza template. Similarly, you can see an attempt looking at the plan of the Giza plateau to plot some of the mathematical relationships between the various pyramids that you can see in plan view. So there's a very good video which I'll leave in the show notes, which looks in detail with Edward Nightingale at the how the square, the circle, and the Fibonacci spiral coming out of the Sphinx and relating to the Great Pyramid and the Red Pyramid mark off a star map on the Giza template when it's viewed from the air. And so you can see the similar kind of attempt
to use
these mathematical relationships to then plot the relationships of, say, the sun and stars and zodiac as
the geometry is used,
a geometric measure of time. So you can see that if we go further into this model of looking at the Giza plateau, that the eyes of the Sphinx produce the hand on a world clock. So if you look at Plato's notion of the great year, which is 25,920 years of solar time, then you see a longer cycle called the precession of the equinoxes, which is where you see these 12 zodiac signs will shift backwards 1 degree out of 360 degrees in the circle every 72 years, which creates this long cycle of 25,920 years, which, if you wait for that long, shows you, according to where the eyes, which constellation rises into the eyes of the Sphinx on the autumn equinox.
So let's just
how long you've gone on a long clock. And so this is another very interesting way of relating.
Time being a 3-dimensional thing.
Relating time
and a 4th dimension.
Relating time to the way we build and how we measure.
So who was Vitruvius? So Vitruvius, the Vitruvian Man. It's a Roman architect, and it's somebody who created this set of treatises, like 10 books on Roman architecture, involved with the planning of cities, military bases. I mean, if you look at a lot of Roman cities like Barcelona or somewhere like that, you see a square grid. You've got this fortress, square grid, and a system in order to be most practical in terms of trade, in terms of urban planning, baths, aqueducts, buildings, harbors. You can see how he worked for emperors in planning. And so a lot of the things that he developed, for example, a lot of Roman cities or based on Roman cities, like if you look at Bologna, what you see there is a lot of square vaulting. So you see these crossed vaults, which are square shapes that relate to a circle, because you've got this.
If you share the screen again, Ollie, I can show you some of the skyscrapers.
Oh yeah, so that's a later development in Bologna. That's family-owned buildings. But what I'm talking about here is how, there was a very dense square grid of spaces, and there's very bright sunlight, and these vaults needed to be created like corridors for the passage of people through the streets, to be able to walk through. And then eventually it grew upwards because it was still within the walls of this, and that's why you got something that looks a bit like New York.
Manhattan.
Today there are only 7 of these towers left.
Most of them are broken down.
They just toppled down because they were made of stone walls, one on top of another. But so the square quattroportite vault, the simple idea of the vault was to have a space which has very good acoustics because it's a circular shape, right? It's very good for saving you from rain and sun and any of the weather effects. It's also a direction that fits one thing to another. So now you're looking at architecture in cathedrals, and again that's another attempt to fit as many people in as possible.
Here we go. There's the picture.
And you're looking at how to plan spaces with these simple shapes. And of course, when the ribs of these vaults cross from an oblique angle as you're walking through this space, you get the Gothic arch appearing, and you get all these more and more complex and taller innovations. But so Vitruvius influenced all of the great classical architects in terms of how to make proportions and how to use practical ideas in the canon of classical architecture, if you like. Now, let's have a look at some classical architecture. So you start with the Ephesus Library.
Yes.
The Ephesus Library is essentially a facade for a very large building that today doesn't survive. It's got a set of niches, so it combines beautiful sculpture with beautiful shapes, columns, and also what you're getting here is a kind of zigzag of interlaced pediments. So these pediments are the little hats in between the columns at the top there. Yeah,
they alternate.
We've got this binary system of sharp, soft, sharp, or soft, sharp, soft in this case. It looks very Baroque.
It looks very much like something out of the 17th or 18th century in Italy, but of course this is ancient. This is
ancient Roman and Greek originally. So ancient Greek library building. So this is a civic building.
It's located in Turkey now, and it was part of Magna Graecia at the time, Greater Greece,
so the Greco-Persian Empire. Yeah, and you're looking at these columns, and at some point at the bottom register, you've got 4 sets of pairs of columns, and then at the top register, you get 3 sort of
pediments,
which are sort of like
porticos,
tabernacles. They're like tents, and often you get this kind of design appearing in ancient Greek theatres. It's actually down the road in Turkey. You can find a lot of these kinds of facades being used in theatres. So around a thing like this, there'll be a semicircular theatre space where actors could appear. So that's the origin of this
good acoustics
building. So this building is a library. It's a centre of learning. So wealthy citizens would go there. And in fact, it was built by a very rich man called Celsus, I think.
Yes.
Who in 110 AD commissioned for the memory of his father this enormous project and spent his whole life building this particular civic building. Obviously, a lot of huge stone quarrying going on there. And it frames 4 niches with 4 statues. So in the middle of those things, the sculpture also becomes something. Right now we're living in a time when public sculptures are being torn down, and that's because they represent specific people who somebody might be offended by. Here, the muses are actually non-specific mythological women
We can't be sure who they were modelled on, whether they're modelled from life
They
or
may be
not.
modelled on certain people, but what they represent are the personification of virtue in the form of arete, the personification of wisdom in the form of Sophia, Sophism, Enia, which is the third personification, which is intelligence, and then the fourth, episteme, is knowledge. So these are like scenai or scenes for theatrical figures or actors replaced by statues, or perpetual actors on these different balconies, who personify 4 different qualities:
Higher ideals.
Manchester, London, Oxford, and Cambridge, for example.
There we go.
Yeah. Now, then that gives you more opportunity to use a building for the proportions of the human body. I mean, these figures are almost to scale.
Yeah.
Slightly larger than life,
than life.
but they from a distance, as you approach that building, you see how the columns are, proportionally bigger than the figures, and then you see these different registers. So it's like effectively a 5-story or 4-story building in our terms, that uses beauty.
So if we look by comparison,
And the triangle and the circle.
if we look at by comparison at explain life in Russia with Pistain lifts and people getting raped in staircases, this is
just
what
lack of
formed-
security, lack
what
of safety.
formed
Yeah.
was not a
People
natural
hanging around
community,
in-
but was a
danger zone.
danger zone for the people that lived there, because it was taken over by bandits and wasn't able to provide a flourishing community in the way that the Victorian
And of
back-to-back
course, there's
streets
no
had
aesthetic beauty there. So if you're surrounded with buildings like that, which I was as a child, until I came to England, I didn't know what art was and I didn't know what beauty was. I fundamentally didn't have an aesthetic psychology. My aesthetic psychology was grey, repetitive, identical windows, and therefore no inspiration, no imagination, and no variety and no expectation. The other thing in Soviet Russia was, of course, the fact they centralized the car industry. So the only type of car was a Fiat or Lada. So as you looked out onto the main road, all you saw was exactly the same car in different colors going back and forth in both directions, and the tram. So the lack of variety from an industrialized civilization that gave you no scope for the imagination at all. And that's changed now, but at the time that was a reality in communism.
This is, of course, part of the problem of, and you talk about variety. If you look at London is a palimpsest of different eras of construction, and so you get some variety from seeing some ancient Gothic,
choice,
from Georgian, from Victorian, from Edwardian, and from modernist design. And so what you can perceive there is this palimpsest is a set of layers of different.
I mean, you could live in
architecture.
that building and at the same time go to the Home House Club designed by Robert Adams. So we were just there the other day and we saw a lot of beautiful interior design, a lot of columns, a lot of
based
classical
on Croatia,
Pompeii,
and the grotesque palace of Diocletian.
So
the summer
Regency
palace of
Regency architecture is still using brick and plaster, simple materials, but in a practical way. And actually, from the outside, a lot of these buildings are very plain. They're not that interesting on the outside. They're interesting on the inside. They make you feel cozy inside.
As we were talking about the Greeks versus the Roman model of cities, whether you have a jewel box inside and a plain outer wall, or whether you have people outside in the city who are not staying in their houses
grand,
anyway.
Swooping staircase, this sort of staircase that is, almost something out of Leonardo da Vinci, which is one set of stairs going around another set of stairs. So I just want to show this simple sketch that I made of it, because this is where the imagination can take off, and you're suddenly looking at a sort of spiral, which comes up from a simple staircase, and it's wide enough to fit 2 people, and then it turns into this sort of oval spiral on both sides,
based on the double helix structure.
Yeah,
as
another beautiful form, another beautiful wave form.
You can see with Leonardo's double helix staircase at Chambord, which is also featured in Palladio, the other great architectural theorist who was
so that's Home House,
16th century Vitruvius.
and I mean, I think it's worth having a look at Spalatum, which is the kind of late Roman capital of Diocletian, the Roman emperor who couldn't have his capital at Rome, so he built this enormous palace. And
If we share the screen, we can have a look.
this is an interior space, a civic space, this is an embassy. You know, it can be a concert hall. It can be so many things, and it uses minimal amounts of architectural materials, because what you're looking at is columns that hold up arches, and you know, Roman arches at this point, not Gothic, but there is this simple idea of the circle, the square, and the triangle. So if you go back one, you can see the square, which is going up to where the arch is.
Yes.
So a perfect square is formed by the negative space,
Yes.
actually, of the two tabernacles around which there is 4 columns, and then there's an arch that leads a round, soft shape into a hard shape.
Yeah, with the split pediment.
So
split
the
pediment
human
shape.
psychology of that is there are these bays, or these sort of, how many, 6 or 8 bays of wide open space that can be accessed from different sides as you come in and out, facing another theatrical altar, if you like. I mean, it is very reminiscent of being in a church, because a lot of church structures obviously later are based on that. So, okay, you've got Robert Adam looking at this palace design for big civic halls, and then you can look at Regency architecture. So if you look at some of his
If we look at some of
buildings,
Robert Adams' designs,
there's interior spaces very similar to this. So if you take Kenwood House interior or Syon House interior,
we can see here.
these are buildings for aristocrats to have their concerts and do's, soirees and balls, in a very similar set of spaces, which gives you left, right, forward, and backward direction. So again, it's based on the Vitruvian idea of the square grid.
Yes. And
It
here we
will
go,
also
some
give you an
grotesque.
acoustic.
Here's some grotesque panels which were taken straight out of the interior
house.
decor
Yeah.
of the Golden House, the Diocletian Palace
right,
in
yes.
Spalatrium, and then taken into Robert Adams' designs.
So
in
no, the
London.
Golden House is
Oh
Emperor
yeah,
Nero.
no, yes.
That's another, but that's a Roman model.
So here we go. Here's the
Which we
the
don't know
double
exactly
cube
what it was.
room, which very much resembles what we see in the Diocletian Palace at Spalatrium in an interior space. And you can see here is an interior. Here we have the same structure of interior space. That
So,
he's
I mean,
cribbed off.
Inigo Jones and all these people looked at Palladio, and for hundreds of years in this country, that was the kind of alma mater of architectural example. So you've got Inigo Jones's palaces like Banqueting House being built in the model of Palladio's books. Drawing, but there's a sort of portico with maybe 4 or 6 rows of columns. As
Here we go.
yeah, it's 4, isn't it? There,
Yeah.
but 4 by 8. There.
Yes.
And you know that dwarfs the human body by 10-fold or something, and huge triangular pendulum. So again, you got the sharp coming into the soft here, the opposite of what we saw in Spalato.
And in the middle of the
Then, if we look at what happened from the classical to the Baroque, which is actually what we see with buildings, Regency palaces by Robert Adam, is that we're breaking down these orders into the idea of the broken pediment. A broken pediment is basically a triangle that's broken down in the middle, like the sort of keystone bit of the triangle has just collapsed. And, you know, this is what Chiswick House or something like this.
It gives this sense of incompleteness or of ruin. So something that may be built quite recently, but gives the
Impression of folly.
of being ancient and having collapsed a little bit, but
Yeah.
still showing its general shape. And
I
you
mean,
can
it's
see
less
in-
boring than having, yeah. So then you get these wavy sort of S curves or occupying the space built on the Silk Road or on the road to Asia by a civilization that's trying
Totally
to make the
unknown.
desert into something like you could compare this to Dubai. You know, you've got a desert and suddenly this incredibly large and impressive theatrical facade has been applied to a rock face, carved out of it, way larger than life. In fact, it's way larger than a lot of the Roman buildings. It's colossal.
It's astonishing, the size. And what we do not know is how it was built or by whom, because it doesn't.
Sean Connery, isn't it?
It doesn't. Yes, it doesn't look. It doesn't look Roman, and the Romans didn't have the tool set to make such large
it's actually
facades
Asian
in Rome.
as well. It's actually an Asian civilization, like a Greco-Persian edge of the Greco-Persian Empire. So you're looking at
You can see the person,
the cross-fertilization
see
between
the
the
size of
Persian
the person,
Empire.
the comparison to the size of this monastery. It was called the monastery in Petra, and this is the less seen of.
Could you imagine
the
that
two
in
main
Calvert?
buildings.
I mean, a huge monolithic thing, maybe not built out of the local limestone, but
carved into a rock face, but
or
yes.
made out of cow pats, something local materials, something
So
very much about the people of Calvert as well, the people of Britain. I mean, what can you use to impress and have this theatrical facade appear like a mirage out of nowhere?
see, you come around the
junction.
side of this cliff, and then you're confronted by a building which dwarfs you.
And here the circle comes out forwards from the triangular broken pediment. So you're looking at spaces forwards, backwards, and in the middle. So you're looking at
So along with Baalbek, this is the most mysterious classical set of buildings, both the monastery and the treasury, which we saw a moment ago at Petra. Why is because supposedly the Romans, according to the mainstream view of how these were built, the Romans exported their architects to build something in greater detail with greater difficulty of carving the stone, because it's carved
it's then subcontracted
into a
to
rock.
local laborers, just like you have in India or in the Americas with these giant town
and then they
halls.
couldn't re-import this level of megalith architecture back to Rome. They were building in mud brick. They were building in Romecrete, the Roman concrete. Hello, Ed. Welcome, Ed Mirza.
I don't know. I mean, I've done my vision.
Well, fantastic.
Well, say hello.
Yeah, say hi. Say hey. Come in the shot. Yes. So we're just discussing Petra. Here's Ed. And ancient megalithic architecture versus modern smart cities. So look at this. Have a look at this. This is astonishing. This is the monastery at Petra. Look at the size of the person.
It wasn't a monastery. It was
It's called the monastery in English.
Yeah.
So there's the size of a person by comparison to this massive rock cut facade, which was totally beyond the technological brief.
And this comes from wealth. This comes, by the way,
supposedly
what's very
created
important about the wealth here is that this is a junction point, just like Calvert, right?
Yes.
Where all the money is going along the road from India into Europe and vice versa. So they can afford to get the workers to do this with the amount of trade that is going on the street. Now, of course, we don't see that trade. What we're seeing is the shell of the,
one theory
living
as to
snail.
theory as to how this particular rock feature came about was
it's not one though. There's a whole row of 10 or 15.
There's lots of these. These are
it's
the
along
two
a
most
road. Yeah.
these are the two most impressive. Whereas actually the building was there before, and this mud came over at the top and it was carved back out again.
And in
Because
fact, the similarity with India is that in India there's a whole set of caves like this, right?
Yes.
The Ellora caves.
Yes.
And the other caves where they carved in several generations. Some of them were Buddhist, some were Hindu. Lots and lots of change in fertilization was going on between different civilizations there. But what's impressive is that is coming out of people turning these rocks into structure. So they're actually living in the earth. They're not shifting a load of stone from one part of the world to another. It's not Carrara Marble Cemetery in Havana, for example. It's we are going to create a sustainable and enduring legacy for future generations, and it's the stone that is actually going to give us that kudos and believable
this is the most astonishing of
permanent
all.
sort of mark.
This is the Ellora temple in India. Now it's claimed
so that's vertically down.
It's claimed that this temple was cut vertically into a flat rock surface. So what you're seeing here is not a building, but a negative space cutting into the bedrock.
The amount of rock cut out there is larger than the amount left
of a building in the negative space. Yeah. So you're cutting out all the bits around, and you leave the bit that's there. It's connected to the bedrock in the ground. Now, this is an almost impossible task, which is not very convincing.
Well, it's possible, as you
with-
can see, with subdivision of labour.
Well, you
and
can see that the
purpose.
thing is there. You can't see how it's been built.
Yeah.
So, according to the level of ability that is claimed of the workers of the day in terms of being in the Bronze Age and being unable to use advanced metallurgy to create steel, the notion that this was created by cutting into a bedrock is it's
Well,
highly
I mean,
skeptical.
we can do anything these days. We've got the machines to be able to drill rock at a much faster rate. I mean, if you go to Carrara, you actually see. I've been inside this Carrara mine where they use water jet to cut out marble at a very high speed.
Yes, quite the perspective of.
And here
how
there's a
it's been cut
perfect
out.
symmetry, and actually there isn't
Or
any.
how it's been filled in.
There
because
isn't
this
any
may be a
broken
mud flat.
idea. It's sort of like it's layers, strata of different carved out design, but there isn't this notion of the broken pediment here. So if we go back to the broken pediment as an idea, the broken pediment is the same as a broken column in that it is a folly or an idea of a fallen empire, right? So a former glory that's sort of got that antique veneer of, and like a nostalgia for a better age that was once better. I mean, it's a silly idea.
We've looked at
because
some
actually
flawed-
we probably the idea of progress doesn't work with the idea of
This romanticism.
it's a romanticism that is also the founding of the concepts behind Baroque and Rococo, which is sort of looking back at the ruins of Rome and the glorious days
If you
of
share the screen, we can see some
architecture,
examples.
which as if we couldn't achieve. I mean, we can
Yes.
we can achieve this.
So
And
this is a
yeah.
view of Rome from the Forum to the Colosseum.
painted
Claude.
by artists for the Grand Tour. Claude and people like this painting for English gentlemen, French gentlemen, German gentlemen arriving to go on the Grand Tour to look at, and this was a huge part of education in the 18th century, to look
Yes.
at the ruins and then take from the ruins and build
Abstract something to build your own
gigantic
version.
civic versions of this, right? Yeah. So
Or
this
the
is like
idea that
prototype.
this is a lost civilization that actually could do things better than we
So
could.
if you
in
take
18th
the
century.
broken column, there's a wonderful one in the National Gallery, which is a painting of the manger with a broken column by Paolo Veronese. So you've got Veronese, and it's in the National Gallery there.
Yeah.
What you're seeing is the manger, which is the new Christian life forming in the ruins of Rome, right? So visually, the people that saw these paintings in Venice in the Baroque period, they're looking at something they're very familiar with because they've been going through liturgy and they've been studying the idea that the Christian church architecture is coming out of a prototype of a folly, of a ruined Roman temple of Forum. And so you've got this simple wooden gable thing above the broken column. And the broken column is this redundant sort of castrated impotence.
Yes. So we see here. I'm trying to find a bit of
Made a massive feature of with the light rays shining on by and illuminating the new Christian theology in the new world of brotherhood, which sort of initially that's a huge contrast. There's a huge conflict between the church and the empire, and so that's when the Roman Empire has to adopt this new religion.
Here we go. So we found that here's the
And it's
the
an epic
illustration.
scene, and you've got animals
So you
here,
have-
Constantine and
The
horse
Magi,
heads.
the kings, adoring the Christ child in somewhat Venetian
Attire,
17th
yeah,
century
absolutely,
attire, but
Yeah.
kind of crossed with the ancients, kind of crossed with Rome, kind of crossed with what they see as modern soldiers in the left hand corner, and then you see someone who looks very much like Ed peering over the side of this broken column in the middle. And so this is then the ruined ancient civilization, which has then been built over by a wooden shack.
Yeah, like sort of squatters.
So this is
Barbarians.
illustrating the degradation of the ancient civilization, which can produce this arch and these columns, but then you then has been taken over by the squatters, by this other civilization, which is much more primitive after the fact, which cobbled together some kind of shack.
Like the barbarians who made their little houses in the Roman ruins.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. That's
So
the idea.
this then became
Flats being made out of old houses and buildings that were actually built to last.
Yes, so what we see in London today is the repurposing of functional utilitarian architecture, like mews houses, which were stable blocks, so they were your garage for your vehicle, for your horse.
Yeah.
Going for millions of pounds. Some of our friends live in very, very expensive
and
mews
factories
developments.
and
Warehouses and factories and wharves.
Warehouse on the
had
waterfront.
to-
Yeah.
had to preserve grain and other perishable products in temperatures that were cool in summer and warm in winter, so as to not spoil the produce. And so what we can now see is that the functional architecture of the past now becomes the domestic architecture of the present, because we don't build anything of the same quality. So instead of building something of that quality of the column that we see, instead we build the shack. And so we say, okay, well, let's repurpose the column from something functional into something that we can live in. And so we live like animals in the past, in the stable blocks, in the mews houses. We live like produce.
Seen as luxury places, aren't they?
Yeah, and we see it as luxury places today. You're
But
quite
at the
right.
same time, this is a very
Ed Mitz, everybody,
theatrical
friend of the
scene.
show, Master Gilder, operatic tenor
Theatre
artist.
is still very important. It's always public theatre, it's always propaganda theatre here. So there's still the elements of the theatre stage from the Ephesus Library, the round arch, the triangular pediment, the columns, they're still there, even though they're kind of recontextualized. So let's have a look now at other theatres. And we go from here to St. Peter's in Rome, which is a facade built by this wonderful artist and architect Maderno, in the place of where Bernini would have had. And then we've talked about this before.
Bernini's facade was very ambitious, but fell down. And then he was forgiven by the Pope to Maderno, who's less well known but less ambitious, but was a jobbing architect.
But he was the one that could get it right.
So Bernini
the,
design.
So the practical solution is sometimes less famous and less pompous, but it actually,
well, as you see with either the British Museum, which is finished by Robert Smirke, who's a much grander design, as you can see with Carlton House, which was finished again by when George IV died. And the best example is Buckingham Palace, which was done as a job lot. When George IV died, Buckingham House was being turned into a palace, which is going to be very, very ambitious, like a Versailles of London. But George IV died. He was mired. It was found his books were opened, and it's found that he was mired in debt. And so they slapped on a very cheap facade, which you can see today in two phases today. And so that they finished the project as cheaply as they could, rather than junking the whole thing. I'm not sure whether we can find a very good impression.
Essentially,
here we go. Bernini's design for facade towers of St. Peter's.
Okay, so those are
very
actually
grand
tall.
Baroque
So
towers.
we have two small turrets on either side of the dome, visible from the front. But they're actually, I think they probably are those still there. So that part of the building has remained.
Well, so what we can see
They're actually
is
very
these
small
bell towers at
either
the
side
back.
of the.
But
the
these
big
were
dome.
much grander designs. I think these.
No, but if you zoom in there, they're actually there. They're
Well,
actually
they
there.
are towers.
They're towers there, and they're quite. I think they're pretty much as they were.
No, these are part of a different phase. There was a phase where Michelangelo produced the nave and apses of this church, and so his was the design. Here you can see in
to
the
replace
back.
the old.
No, that was
red brick.
that was built first, and then they're going to put. Then the generation afterwards, Bernini was going to put the front on after Michelangelo died. And he produced the dome and then the body of the cathedral. So these, I think, are Michelangelo domes.
And then Bernini is making
and then
the
Bernini's
two
making the facade.
wings as well.
And then so he did make these.
So Bernini was going
pincers.
to be taking all of the facade and all of the impression of this huge public space. Now let's have a look at this civic space. It's an arena. It's exactly that same round theatre of ancient Greece arena around the stage, with exactly the same alternating soft and hard pediments, which are many. I mean, you've got about 7 pediments in the center of the facade.
Yeah.
And then you also got these lovely square frames in between the columns. Instead of just having just windows, there are lots of round arched windows, but there are also in between them these Baroque frames which have these kind of zigzag shapes. And
Yes.
yeah, it's good to zoom
This was
a bit more.
This was a
see
Michelangelo design, which you can
So
see.
framed pictures or empty frames for whatever you can imagine. The niche is working as the imaginary space. As you look on to this facade, you're faced with the balcony where the Pope can come out.
So it's a real pastiche piece.
Yeah, and it's instead of the 4 virtues of Arete, Sophia, Anuia, and Episteme, you have the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You got the Pope and the cardinals who can appear just like a dictator, sort of like Stalin on the Lenin mausoleum. They can come and wave at the square in the theatre, so they become protagonists above these framed empty pictures and some relief as well. So there is some sculpture present, but it's very minimal. It's just huge blocks of limestone, and then you've got other saints and sculptures above. So the Pope's thing is in the triangular pediment, and then the dome is far behind. So there are 2 clocks as well, and additional arches, and then empty niches and windows in between. And if you look at the size of a person there,
yes,
it's
on the
even
same
smaller.
As
it's like Petra, isn't it?
Petra,
It's an enormous scale.
So what I wanted to show you, Philip, was what we're up against. And they have made a mark. The other side in this great future look like, and we think that the future looks like the past, and that the future should be classical and pro-human and aesthetically pleasing because it allows people to be imaginative
and theatrical.
It allows
as it seems.
people
It's like
to create
it's a nice
and to
play
to understand.
Yeah.
So if we look then at the Georgia Guidestones, which appeared overnight in
over a great civilization. The harmony of the square and the circle, the harmony of the triangle is missing.
So,
or even if it's there, it remains as sort of like that ruin in the background of our sort of.
So you think that we're doomed to have sort of an epicenter of high rents and everyone sort of clamoring around it, and because of architecture, because of sort of rubbish houses round and about, which have.
So you have this patchwork effect, this palimpsest effect in London, which we were discussing, and in other cities, because there are different things being built at different times. Well, we began with this conversation, this notion of what is a rational smart city. Okay, we can look at the ugliness of somewhere like Milton Keynes, and we can see how not to do it, how the 60s did it, and how we shouldn't do it, which is to create these dehumanized architecture.
It's a bit like the government saying we're going to give everyone these nice jobs and everyone will be nicely employed, but actually half the jobs are probably dead-end jobs, aren't they? Where people have no prospects and aren't really paid enough, and it's a dreadful drudge. And it's similar with how they're going to build all these houses. You end up with Milton Keynes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so
favelas in the worst case scenario, if you're looking at Camelot and what's the other company? Property Guardians.
Very poor students or whatever.
VPS.
Yeah.
Hi. We love the VPS. But making £1 million in clean cash, from 70 people in a building.
So they do property management of derelict buildings for the freeholder.
Yeah, so they're saying, we're living in the ruins of Rome.
An anti-squat.
Yeah,
yes.
You can pay to sort of protect this building from the barbarians, but you are the barbarians anyway. So you pay us to squat the building, and we make sure you don't have any central heating. We make sure that you don't have any security because you don't know who's coming in and out. You can't have any valuables in your property. You can't have any children or dogs. You can't have any guests. You're basically just paying to be a sort of
and you'll have to
managed squatter
without a life. So you're paying rent, but you don't have the same rights as a tenant, even though you're paying quite a considerable amount of money. you in London are paying for the privilege of being in the particular area that you want to be, but
Maybe
you're
having
you're
space
losing all your rights. For
internally.
example, they can just kick you out in the space of a month's warning.
You have no quiet enjoyment of your property. You
No.
can be moved on at any time and so on.
But of course, it's sort of apparently cheaper than having, and that's then the battery solution, the squatting solution.
So this is where we start with the micro homes concept, because our notion is to create an
Like those little
ownable.
Pods that the Japanese sleep in.
Yes, like the Japanese pods.
Really?
To create an ownable, not quite like that, but
Okay.
to create an ownable solution to whether that's in terms of fractional ownership, so you buy in
Okay.
to a property with the money you have, and you're going to see that appreciate over time as an
Oh, you're going
investment,
to democratize.
and so we can
property.
democratize property. Now, what we can do with micro homes in the smart city is create such useful and commodious shared space, whether it's studio space or hot desking space or community eating and cafeteria space, whatever it happens to be inside a development, that you don't want to be in your little box that much. You shower there and you sleep there, but you don't necessarily have to. Maybe you do some Zoom meeting calls there. You have hot desk, you got desk. Maybe you can have your guests sleep there on a sofa bed. So you then have a 2-person single bedroom turning into a 4-person 2-bedroom property.
But it's an urban economy.
But you then will be out in the world and not in your box. So you might be in a shed, if you're an artist like these two, you might be in a shared art studio space that's inside the complex that then farms it out.
That's what it is
of
for
being
most people that
inside your
come out of the
house.
building. But for us, it was important to live in the building. And I think it was impossible for most people to live like that because they needed to be in the city so they could be in the city because of the nature of their work. I just want to go to another idea of the rural life. So let's take Villa Barbaro by Palladio.
So if we look at the Quattro Libri, which is
the Quattro
what we
Libri, the
saw
4 books on
with
architecture, and we're
with
looking at his
Palladio.
drawings for the design, where he adapts the Roman Forum and arches and symmetry into a very convenient living space, not just for horticultural activity around or a person, a child. They can all fit into something that is aesthetically pleasing, symmetrical. There's this sort of idea of bays where they can go into different arches. It's sort of like a kind of Mexican casa, isn't it? With
Yes.
you could leave cities in noughties and go to Greece or France, wherever, and buy an old property like this for next to nothing.
Chateau DIY
And live off
concept
working
Channel 4.
online, right? So they could be on a Zoom meeting and effectively not have to be in the city. And then they afford the space. Yeah, they can then.
So you're trying to decentralize England a bit.
So there are two movements. There's the movement of people into cities, and they want to have access to gigabit internet, to meeting people and mixing with them, and all the entrepreneurship and commerce and creativity that can flow from that meeting point.
So
But
they
also
adapted this.
entrepreneurship and commerce and
It's just good to look at different spaces that were created for people.
I was just thinking about this because, obviously in the past they would try to build sort of pleasant-looking town halls around in sort of Greater England, and the places remain rather unfashionable, don't they? And even in South London, a place like sort of Kennington, for example, has quite nice architecture, but it still remains quite unfashionable, doesn't it? It's a bit difficult to get away from this thing about London being the centre and sort of, the driving out the rents and being fashionable, isn't it? It all seems to centre on the best architecture around in Mayfair.
the first image we have is
City.
Kennington BBC Kennington stabbing.
Yeah.
Man
Yeah.
30 dies in South London estate as the first entrance in our little Google image listing for Kennington.
There's some stunning stuff around there, but
there's some beautiful
essentially
architecture.
It's, people don't particularly want to go there.
Well, it doesn't have an opera house, and this is the thing.
It's more culture and so spread out.
If we go to another civic building, I've just got a couple left. I mean, Villa Barbara Gardens is very nice, but let's have a look at the Palladio Civic Hall revamp in Vicenza. So this is where he took a Gothic existing hall with already large Gothic vaulted spaces and made it by the bays into circles and little columns and circular.
These Venetian apertures. Yeah.
Beautiful
That's good.
building. And a set of vaults where people can hide and have a market.
Wasn't it, in London
Well, let's
now?
have a look at St Paul's because that's a similar thing
Yeah.
where Wren.
But it once had a bigger, didn't it have a bigger sort of something or other?
Well, look at the portico on the Wren Aissance, where he has a double 2-story set of columns. So you've got the sort of piano nobile and the piano rustico beneath of these beautiful white
Everyone used to hang out, didn't they, around here
Portland
and sort of
Yes.
drinking coffee and
So you have.
and you've got the circular
double
space
height.
again, the theatre space for the public.
Just my
Circular space of the square.
my great grandfather was a dean of St Paul's. By the
Yes.
way, interestingly enough.
It's,
Which I
And then you've got these towers from Florence, which are copied by Wren from the San Lorenzo Church. If you
Oh.
look at the towers on the San Lorenzo Chapel,
Did you know that? I mean, is it,
Lorenzo, the San Lorenzo Chapel in Florence, where Michelangelo actually
built his other
built
dome. Yes.
the dome and built the statues for the Medici tomb.
But it's also it is the first church in London, isn't it? On that site, is that correct? So you could go
No,
along with that
second.
idea?
The second church.
The first one burned down.
The first
No,
one
but
was
I
a
mean the
Gothic,
site, that particular
Oh, the
site.
site may well. I don't know if
I
the
think St Paul's.
Westminster Abbey.
Hmm?
No, it was a
maybe.
Gothic one. So there's a Gothic as you
Yeah,
call
like
the
in that
massive
same site, it was
spire.
a different.
And so this is the San Lorenzo dome in Florence.
And if you look very carefully in there, that to
It's quite
Palazzi.
a coincidence actually, because my grandfather went to school with the father of the man who wrote Winnie the Pooh, Christopher Robin. Christopher Robin.
Yes.
Christopher
And
Wren.
so he's the one that
Yes.
built St Paul's
And
Cathedral.
also named after a bird.
So
It's slightly-
There's a whole interlacing. In fact, Christopher Wren was a
Finch
bird.
and
Yeah,
Wren,
yeah.
yeah.
He was actually. In
And he
fact,
So-
and Isaac Newton was in fact an amphibian,
And he
and
built
they had a
it,
bit of a set to on the steps of the Royal Mint.
So we're just looking at these two interesting Byzantine buildings that influenced a lot of Gothic architecture later. Michelozzo, Palazzo Riccardi, and
Here we
Palazzo
go.
Strozzi as well. So this is where the Roman arch meets
The Gothic
huge
and
boulders,
the Romanesque.
and again,
Look at
lots
the
and lots of
New York Federal
spaces.
Reserve thing.
Yes. So you can see here, actually, they've punched these Baroque windows inside
you got
large
the classic
Romanesque
element
walls.
inside a round arch. Yeah. So again, this time this is hard.
You can see one of them has an arch here opened up, but the rest of them filled in.
and then the wider roof with these giant wooden beams,
Corbels. Yeah.
which creates a shadow and sort of protects you from the sun that way. And you've got the Piano Nobile, which is much higher. Same thing as Ephesus Library, just turned into another form.
Yes. So what we want to see was the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. We can see this design again.
But are there any examples of architecture from today that you admire that you
The
think are
complete copy.
Well,
Yes.
you look how it's being used 100 years ago today. You know, like it's being used in the skyscrapers of Fifth
To
Avenue.
commemorate the Medici
Hmm.
financial power, right?
Yes. And then we
So
have
it's a subliminal
essentially the same
message that's
design.
being pushed again and again to look at the theatre of civic buildings and the forum and the power of the forum, where, you know, Dominus in urbe est and in foro est.
Yes. So what we are looking at though is how to
God is in the forum. God is in the order
As in
of
our Lord, Dominus.
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, dominate.
Dominate
But
Logos.
in that notion of domination, which is very much against this Athenian notion of democracy.
Well,
We've got
Plato
to
didn't
then-
believe in democracy.
We've got to then balance.
He was a fascist.
Yeah,
He
the
was
royalist,
essentially a fascist. We've got to then balance some of this humanizing potential of architecture with also as Alex Jones said very well the other day, a democracy protects the majority, but a republic protects the individual.
So how do we
So we've
break
got to-
out of the forum? How do we break out of a rigid dictatorial forum? And we look back at Palladio and we look at Venice, which is a city in the water, a city in the clouds, a city floating perpetually until it sinks. And let's look at St. Giorgio Chapel.
Palladio built the bridge, right? What was it called? The main bridge and the Rialto Bridge as well in Venice.
I'm not sure. I won't be. I'm not.
don't
I'm
think
not really sure. I agree
so.
there. I think
So this
not,
is
but-
an island
But this is
church.
where a forum breaks out of a broken pediment and the four breaking.
People to live on a human scale and to live in a built environment that gives them creative potential.
It could be because of the sort of barbaric past of Europe, really, couldn't it? 'Cause they're sort of used to it. They were sort of naked savages squatting in the old Roman ruins. That's how they started, isn't it? So as you say, yeah, we need to get past that mentality, I think.
Did they?
Yeah, they were sort of naked, went around in animal skins. You know, when the Romans
They
were
sacked
civilized,
Rome and they
They
pillaged
came
Rome.
along
yeah.
Kind of like Berlin, I suppose. Like you just like live in dilapidated grandeur. Like
Yeah.
hipsters. Like
And they thought, what are we going to do with all this
Mansion house, yeah.
architecture and these straight roads? Didn't know what to do, so they made.
They
them
just
sort of
left it there in
Yeah.
Berlin. It's sort of like
living there
a
among the
broken
ruins.
ruin of a
Yeah.
Go to
Nazi.
some fucking fisting club in a power station.
yeah.
So we need to get beyond this sort of mentality of squatting in sort of the derelict sort of remains
Detritus of what
detritus
remains.
of the past.
And thinking that you're an outsider, and in fact participate
to elevate
in-
rather than to
in the liberty and the enjoyment of the aesthetic proportions, and be one with the harmony of these buildings. Get harmony and forget dissonance.
also maybe even to fall back on pastiche, like to sort of sort of
Jump
the
started.
failing of the postmodernists to
So
pastiche it. You know what I mean? Not
So
to
where
create-
are we now? We're bringing together ancient architecture, human proportion, aesthetic
And we've
beauty
seen all these
and
buildings in different
satisfaction
places that do the
across
same
the
thing.
world
Yeah.
with the ability of new infrastructure to build something on a human scale that is beautiful and useful for us today. And
Calvert Junction.
there we arrive at Calvert Junction, the crossing point between the HS2 line and our new proposed varsity crossrail extension between Oxford and Cambridge, connecting Shenfield to Reading. Now, this project is what we're going to be taking on in the next few months here at the New Athens. We're accelerating the Smart Cities program. We're bringing
Liverpool Town Hall will
bringing
be
on,
outdone at Calvert 22.
and so we'll be
Junction.
having Alistair Lentner on the show very soon, I'm sure.
Calvert 22 is the
look
name of a gallery.
further
But yeah.
at this proposal for a new smart city in Calvert Junction, on this confluence point between the two railways. And so what we've been looking at today is how in some of the design and in some of the aesthetics and in some of the town planning, we might articulate what a human shaped city based on cycling and walking and trains might end up looking like. And so with that, I think we have a musical interlude from Ed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Should we do it against that wall or something? Or do we have to do
No,
it
just
here?
stay here.
Or sitting down.
We can adjust the camera.
Yeah,
Yeah, we could
break
have
the
like
fourth wall.
standing up against a different wall slightly.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Hang on. What are you singing?
Yes.
Oh, Solomia.
Oh, right.
But- I just thought maybe a change of scene.
Oh, yeah. Oh, hang on. We'll change that. Here we go.
I was hoping it would be a sort of surprise and a change, a shot.
There you go.
Not like, are you ready? No, I'm fine like this.
No, you
No, I
you
wanna
should
wear-
really.
I want to wear this.
No, you
I want to wear
should
this.
add the architecture.
No, I don't
to
wear
it.
it. I'll wear it next time.
Okay.
No, I appreciate it, but yeah, I know, but
Right. That's it from me. Carry on.
what key you want to do it? I don't want to mess up on the height. Okay, yeah. That was supposed to be like seamless,
This is secret.
not seamless at all.
Not secret.
Okay. Che bella cosa andare una notte sola, Nuria serena, dopo una tempesta, per l'aria fresca, parigina festa, che bella cosa giornata e sole, ma tu sole, più bella in me, oh sole mio, sta in fronte a te, oh sole mio, sta in fronte a te, sta in fronte a te. Feel the sunlight in all its splendor. Forgotten is the storm, the clouds now vanish. The freshening breezes, heavy as the vanish. Beyond the brilliant sun in all its splendor. Oh, sunlight of that brightest day. This sun, my dear one, is not but thee. Thy face, so fair to see. Now, now, my son, but cool. Is that the end?
That's the end.
As I signed it off. Cool. I just thought it's gonna be good. That you should do that like every week. Like have someone make me, someone else perform.